I hope you all are having a wonderful day. My name is Yupari, and I'd like to invite you into this still life painting demonstration. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off first with charcoal, and we're working on a 11 by 14 inch canvas panel. So canvas has been glued onto the panel. It's very kind of cheap panel that you would buy kind of in a bundle, and what I did was I just toned it with burnt umber oil paint several weeks ago. So the colors that we will be using are Flake white, titanium white, burnt umber, alizarin permanent, cadmium red medium, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep, cadmium green, sap green, cobalt teal, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. Now to get started with this still life painting, I'm going to think about the composition first. So here we have a little T-square, and I'm going to use the T-square to help me draw a straight line. So this is going to be a little bit, I don't want to say a little bit lower than the halfway point. Now if this is 14 inches here, this is going to be a little bit below the 14, so this is maybe, I don't know, 6.5 inches. I'm not even going to measure that. So what we're going to do is we're going to consider the overall composition of all of the shapes first. So for instance, with very simple, a few simple little lines here, I have kind of the idea of where I want to place one element of the still life. And what you want to do is consider the entire design of the picture quite early on. So maybe in the first, I don't know, the first minute, just think of where everything is going to fit. Don't worry about the exact outlines of anything just yet. Just think about the overall big picture. So let's use the T-square again. So let's say we're going to put the bottom of that little platform, I don't know, maybe somewhere over here, somewhere about over there. So now when you have multiple elements in a composition such as this, we have three elements. So we have the little thing that's containing the lemons, and then we have a slice of lemon, and then we have a little jar here. So what you want to do is consider all of the elements in relation to one another and think about how they fit onto your canvas. So now that we have the elements roughly established, meaning that I want this little container of lemons to be exactly here, now I can go in and start to delineate some more exacting little outlines. So rather than bore you with the kind of the outlining of each individual shape, I'm only gonna show you a little bit of how I go about drawing these specific forms. So what's most important is really the gravity of any kind of thing that's resting on a surface, meaning just roughly with the T-square, let's give ourselves a little center line here. Now this is some like very preliminary stuff, but it's going to be kind of important. So if this is the center line of this little jug, I want to make sure that that center line is working in relation to this plane here. So rather than thinking of the little curve of the jar here, I'm not too worried about how these little wrinkles or whatever you want to call them fits. Rather, I'm thinking of the gravity of that object. Now another object that isn't quite as, should I say, I don't have to worry about the gravity so much, is this little slice of lemon. So really all I have to think about this lemon is how does it fit in relation to the design that I want. I'm not really going to focus on a center line for this because it can rock back and forth. It could be almost anywhere. So basically I'm thinking of, if I use a horizontal line from the corner of the top of this piece of lemon, how does this horizontal line match up with this? So I'm thinking that I want this to come a little further down, probably to about there, so that on a horizontal, the lemon is a little bit higher. See that? And this is one of the advantages of working from life. So I'm working by observation. So I have the still life over there, but I've provided you with a photo reference of it. So the advantage is I can turn my head almost anywhere. I can duck, I can sit up or whatever, and I can change my vantage point. So working from life gives me multiple vantage points from which I can pick and choose. So I use this to help me place where I want this to be. All right, so now the very last thing I'll do is just consider the top portion of one of the lemons in relation to this little glass jug. And by the way, when you're setting up a still life, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I think about the story behind the still life. So there's kind of a little story to this. It's like, I guess the story would be pretty obvious. You have a collection of little lemons, you have a little strainer here, and then you have a slice of lemon, and you have a glass jar. Go figure what we're going to make with this little arrangement. So you can make kind of a story that the lemons are going to be kind of cut up and then squeezed into this little glass jar. And then there you go, there's the narrative of the still life. The story of how lemons turn into lemonade. All right, so now I'm just going to draw a little more specificity into these shapes. Now, as we start to finish up the little outlines for the still life, another important thing to talk about is how you use numbers within your still life. So I like using odd numbers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and remember we have 3 elements, being the thing containing the lemons, the jar, and the slice of lemon. Now that we have the simple outlines drawn in there, let's go ahead and start to move into the next phase of this still life, and that's going to be the large color masses. So I'm not using any medium, just a size 12 flat bristle brush. I'm going to combine burnt umber and ivory black and a very healthy amount of paint. And I'm going to go ahead and cover the background with this color. Now that we've covered the large mass for the background, oh, also I should say that I'm not going over top of my charcoal lines, rather just going really close to them and leaving a little gap in between them. So the next mass to cover is going to be the, I guess this one here for the jug. So I'm thinking of the kind of average color that would exist in between all of the nuance in here. So I'm simplifying it into just one kind of unified shape. So I'm going to use just kind of a gray. Now, these are too close, so I'm actually using the titanium white and ivory black. So just titanium white and ivory black. Now I want to see how that compares to the value of the background. And again, I'm not using any medium, so I'm pretty satisfied with this flat color. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this shape now with this flat color. All right, now that we're just about to finish covering this mass here for the jug, the next thing I'm going to do is move on to cover the masses for the lemon, or for the lemons over here. So I'm going to do something a little different with the lemons. So I'm going to block in light and shadow masses for the lemons. So if you look at the shadow, we're going to start with the shadow first. Now I know it's a yellow in shadow, but even though it's yellow and shadow, it's going to have a little bit of warmth to it. So I'm going to use the burnt umber. Now this is how it appears to me. Now in life, well, from what I'm observing, so in nature, I see a little bit of ambient color in here, kind of reflecting from this. Obviously not that green. That was a mistake. So there's going to be a little bit of green or blue in the reflections for the lemons, but not quite as much. And I'm not sure if it's visible in the photo reference or not. So just using cadmium yellow deep, yellow ochre, a little bit, let's use a little bit of cadmium green. And I think I forgot to mention, if you want to know exactly what materials I'm using, you can go ahead and scroll down to the description box below, and I'll have all of that information typed up for you. Not sure if I mentioned that earlier. Now it's a little bit of burnt umber. There we go. Put in the shadow over here. So I'm going to be blocking in simple shapes of light and dark for these lemons. A little shadow over here. And while painting in the shadow, I have to also consider the direction of the light. So that is, the light's coming from that direction. All right, so now let's block in a color for the light. So I'm going to work a little bit darker and warmer for the lemons, and that's because as I add more and more values later, I know I'm going to use more white, and white itself is a coolant. And remember, I'm not using any kind of medium, I'm not using any paint thinner or liquid or stand oil or anything, just the paint itself. So using a little bit of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep. And I really like that cadmium yellow deep. Now I know that the materials are typed in the description below, but I'll just go ahead and just tell you what this color is. It's from, if I can pronounce it, it's from Grumbacher. Grumbacher, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. But anyway, I really like this cadmium yellow deep. Don't like it much for portrait. I used to use it a lot for portrait, but I just find that it's just too strong of a yellow for portrait. But for still life, man, it's really nice. So there's a little light shape here. Let's block that in. Switching back to the shadow color. Notice I have a brush for shadow and a brush for light for these lemons. And remember, I'm kind of working with odd numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but there is a little tiny glimpse of a smaller one down here, but I didn't count it earlier just because these shapes are so much larger. Okay, so now the next thing that would kind of make sense to block in now that we have these colors would be the slice of lemon. So using just the same color mixtures I had for this light, just adding a little bit of flake white. And I'm going to start off with this very light light. Now, the difference between flake white and titanium white is that I can use more of it without losing the intensity of the color. Now, if I want to raise the value very quickly with a small amount of white, that's when I'll use titanium white. That's why I use titanium white for the background. A little light there. Just follow through all around here. Now I know that I said that I was going to block in simple flat masses, but for this instance, I think I can just go straight into a variety of colors. So this is actually the shadow brush that I had for these lemons. So I'm just using it to scumble on this darker value. Now I'm going to use some cadmium green and burnt umber. Just cadmium green and burnt umber. And you know what? More cadmium green for the shadow over here. See how very quickly we can get the effect of light on such a small little object using this technique. And now I'm going to switch to the cadmium yellow using the light brush, cadmium yellow deep. I'm going to put in just a smidgen of cadmium red. Just a tiny bit of it. Let's see if that's enough. Should be enough. So there's a little more chroma right there in this little area. Just a little more chroma. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and put in the little shadow mask here. I'm going to use a completely different brush. I'm going to take from the background color and put in this dark accent here. The accent is the area where one form meets another form, and that's the area that's going to receive the least light. And let's take a little bit of this color and just block that in. Combination of basically the background color and this color is what I'm using for the shadow. Now, the next large mass that I'm going to want to block in is going to be this mass here. And then I'll get into this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Cobalt Teal, a little bit of Cobalt Teal. Let's use some Flake White. Cobalt Teal, Flake White. I'm actually blurring my eyes a little bit as I look at the cloth. So Cobalt Teal, Flake White, Ultramarine Blue. Let's test that color up against this color. So you can actually relate shapes of color to one another. So now, immediately I see that this is going to compete with this. So, in fact, this will have to go darker. Now, the reason I covered a flat shape there was so that I could work on top of it. Now, oil paint takes a while to dry, especially if you're not using any medium. So, the reason I'm covering flat shapes like this is to work over top of them and put in smaller and smaller shapes. So let's just fill the rest of this shape here now with this combination. And remember, the combination of colors: Cobalt Teal, a little bit of Flake White, tiny bit of Ultramarine Blue, and I did add a little bit of Ivory Black just to make it a little less chromatic. So let's just cover the rest of this now. Now that we covered this little platform, the next thing that I'm going to want to cover is going to be this little bottom area. So I'm going to use a very similar combination of Ivory Black, Ultramarine Blue, a little bit of Cobalt Teal, a little more of Cobalt Teal. And let's see. Yep. So I'm going to use this color mixture now to just fill in the rest of this. Now that we got the bottom of the platform covered, the next mass to move to will be right there. So I'm going to switch to a different brush, or should I say two different brushes. So I'm going to use a little bit of, let's use the dirty portion here of the titanium white. So titanium white, a little bit of Alizarin permanent, tiny bit of Cobalt Teal. So let's see. So it's going to create a kind of purple. So let's use this now for the light areas. Kind of a lilac color. Now in the photo reference, you might not be able to see it, but I see a little bit of kind of lilac in the light areas of the this little white strainer. Is it a strainer? I don't know. It has little holes on the bottom here, so anyway, so I'm going to use this to cover the flat shape of light here. Here's a little handle right there. Very simple now. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is create this plane. Now I'm going to introduce the idea of planes, especially starting with this area. So a plane change is basically just kind of a three-dimensional construct of a flat object in space. And depending on the angle that that object makes in relation to the light source, it will have a particular value. And remember, value just means how light or how dark something is. So this area right here is going to be a plane change in relation to this lilac color. So it's another purple, but it's a little darker in value. And let's make it even darker. So let's just take some of this color here. Just mix onto it directly. So that ought to do it. So just like we did with the lemons, we're going to establish a light mass and a dark mass for this little bottom platform using a different brush. I'm going to make a combination of Cobalt Teal, Alizarin Permanent, just Cobalt Teal, Alizarin Permanent on top of this color. And let's see how it does. So the value should be a little bit, really close to this value actually. So let's just use this combination. So the Cobalt Teal, Alizarin Permanent right on top of this color here. And let's actually throw in a little flake, and let's just use the flake white from here. Now remember, the difference between flake white and titanium white in terms of how you use them is that you can use basically more flake white in the halftones without raising the value too much. Now that's still kind of too close to this platform color, so I'm going to add a little more Alizarin Permanent. So I'm kind of comparing these masses of color in relation to one another. And these are how you relate colors, just flat shapes. So I think that's all right. So let's just cover the rest of this now. And I'm also leaving a little gap, as you noticed, in between the shapes here. And that is because, one, I don't want to lose the outline that I drew. And two, I know that I'm going to come back in with more specific shapes and establish a much more refined edge between these shapes. All right, so let's actually, there's a little glimpse of light there. So let's take this same brush, add a little bit of the dark, put that in there. And now let's go back into this dark. Very simple there. All right, so this painting is just about ready for the next stage. So the next stage of this painting, so after the flat shapes, we're going to move into the small plane, what do I even call this? The smaller planes. So consider these larger masses or larger planes, whatever you want to think of it. And now we're going to subdivide each one of these little shapes. So let's see, where do we start? Let's start with the jug. So starting off with the jug, really quickly, I notice that there needs to be a different value here now, because we're going to see some of the background. So let's use ultramarine blue, ivory black. So we're working big shapes to little shapes. And now we're going to kind of make our way to the smaller shapes. So this is going to be pretty dark, so let's just throw ivory black into this. And again, this is why I'm covering this is why I covered the area with these flat shapes, so that I can just keep layering wet on wet. It really gives me a lot of control over edge quality. So let's see, actually this whole thing needs to get darker. So let's go ahead and make it darker. And remember, I'm kind of just using ivory black to make this darker. Ivory black on top of the color that we already had. Let's put in a little shape there. See that? See how we can kind of see through the glass into the background, but you can still have some evidence of the fact that the glass is there by having the little bit of blue there. Let's use, I see a little bit of warmth here, and I don't know why, but there's a little tiny bit of warmth, so let's use Alizarin permanent, I don't know, Alizarin permanent, Ultramarine. So, I don't know, I just see a little bit of warmth there. Now then, this area too will get darker. Simple little brush stroke there. Also, there's going to be some dark, so let's use a little bit of ultramarine blue. A little more ultramarine blue. So this area is going to be pretty dark, almost disappearing. Basically disappearing. And then let's take some of this. A little lighter there. Now then, a little bit of ultramarine blue again, and we're going to put in the little accent here. A little accent where one form meets another. And there's a little bit of light down here, so let's use a different brush. Titanium white. So remember, titanium is nice to raise the value very quickly. So a little bit of light here. A simple shape of light. And I see it a little more bluish, so I'm going to use Cobalt Teal for that. And now there's going to be a little glimpse of light over here. So Cobalt Teal, Titanium White, a little bit of light over here. See how we're starting to build on top of the shapes? A little ultramarine blue. And now we're going to have this light. See how we're automatically kind of already covering the edges? Alright, so there's going to be a very definitive line right here. And that's going to be one little rim for the glass. And another, actually, a little bit of Cobalt Teal. There's going to be some light actually showing through here. Now let's go back to the light. And a very simple little light shape here. Doesn't have to be too perfect. Now on the rim. See how we're kind of automatically covering the little bit of outside shape that we left? This actually comes out a little more. There we go. A little bit more light down here. Now there's going to be an area probably around here that's going to be the darkest. So let's use Ultramarine and Alizarin permanent, and let's use a color change to help make this look even darker. See that? A little more ultramarine. Now we're going to get into some really, really tiny shapes. So let's take a look at this little plane change here. So that's pretty much just ultramarine blue, titanium white. There's actually going to be a little more blue here. Now using a different brush with just titanium white, ivory black, and ultramarine blue, we're just going to start to scumble some little traces here of dust. I think it's dust that we're seeing there. And in my studio, there are multiple lights in my studio, primarily for the filming. So there's actually going to be a secondary light. So I'm going to use titanium white and cadmium yellow deep for that light. And there's going to be some little traces of it. You can kind of see the reflection of my light source there. So just titanium white, cadmium yellow deep. And I'm using quite a bit of paint. So let's see, another little light here. Now I'm not trying to copy exactly what I'm looking at. That's never really what I want to do. I'm interpreting the shapes in front of me and creating a painting through that type of interpretive process. A little bit of light here. Don't want to go crazy with the highlights, but I do want to add some little glimpses of highlight. Just a little trace of light there and there. And there's even going to be a little more kind of warmth. So cadmium yellow deep with a little bit of cadmium red. Just a little bit there. And now let's use a little bit of cobalt teal, ultramarine blue, flake white. There's a little bit of a glow out here. Little glow of blue. Right around here. See how we're automatically filling this little gap? And I can even see some of that glow out here. So just cobalt teal, ultramarine blue, flake white. And there we have this color. Little tiny glimpses of color here. There's even kind of a light here. Single brush stroke time. And that light is going all the way down here. And it's actually going to get a little lighter, so I'll use the titanium white. Now it's getting even lighter down here. let's just cover this little shape now. And to eliminate glare, I'm going to use a little fan brush. Remember, glare is just the paint reflecting the light in the room. Now, there's going to be another little glow over here, but it's going to be darker. So a little more ultramarine blue, ivory black, cobalt teal. And now we have this corner. Very simple. Doesn't have to be complicated. A little more ultramarine blue, why not? Let's just throw in some more chroma. A little more of it out here. See how we've already covered that little outline that we left? It's a little light here that I want to describe. So I'm going to use titanium white, ultramarine blue. A little more light there. And I'm going to use just titanium white and cobalt teal. There's a little glow over here. A little glimpse of blue. Even over here. Very simple. Titanium white. And titanium white, cobalt teal. A little more light over here. Now we're really starting to kind of get the effect of glass. A little more cobalt teal. You have a little light here. Kind of exaggerated that light a little bit, but that's okay. That's a nice little area to leave just a single brush stroke. Let's see. There's a strange little light shape here. So just titanium white. Not sure what it is. I think it's a little design of this jar in the back. So let's just put that in there. Why not? And there we have that little design. And let's try to eliminate some of the glare. Fan brush. Very lightly. And with a little bit of flake white and cobalt teal, we're going to go ahead and put in even more light over here. I need a little more paint. That ought to do it. Now that's a very bright and chromatic color. Probably stronger than what I'm actually observing. So I'm going to go ahead and use some titanium white to neutralize that color. Just calm it down a little bit. Now it's a little bit of ivory black and flake white. We're going to put in some more light here. Just a tiny bit more. Just let this edge get really soft down here. This is why I like to work wet on wet, because I have a lot of control over the edges. See how I can kind of blend the edges away to make them softer? Now let's go ahead and add some more tiny little shapes for the lemons. So I'm gonna get a little combination of burnt umber, a little bit of alizarin permanent down here, and let's just establish the darkest darks right there. The little corner of the lemon over here, another little dark corner. I don't know if I see any other. All right, so a little bit of alizarin permanent, some sap green to make a nice little warm dark. And right about here, we have the accent where one lemon meets another. I'm pushing that color a little too red, so let's use some ultramarine blue to combat that red color. Simple little dark shape there. Now for each individual lemon, we're going to consider now the form involved in the sphere. So we're going to generalize the lemon into a type of sphere. So let's use a different brush here. I'm running out of brushes. So titanium white, cadmium yellow deep. This is going to be our lightest light. And now we're going to use a little bit of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep, tiny bit of cadmium green, and the flake white. And now you're going to notice how quickly we're going to be able to create the illusion of form. And remember I said we're going to generalize the form into a type of sphere. So I know that the lemon isn't a perfect sphere, but a sphere is going to have a nice little gradation of tone. So we're going to kind of employ that type of thinking in terms of gradating from light all the way to shadow. All right, so there's going to be a little glimpse of light here. So it's kind of like a sphere with a little lump right here. All right, now switching to the middle value. Let's go ahead and add a little more cadmium yellow deep. See how we're starting to put in these plane changes. Very quickly now, we're going to sculpt out the form. And let's add a little color variation. So some cadmium red. Just vary the color a little bit down here as we start to approach the shadow side. I'm going to use a little bit of burnt umber, cadmium yellow deep, tiny bit of alizarin permanent, and just make sure that this shadow is well established. So basically, the form of a sphere would be light shadow, half tone, light, light, and then dark light. Dark light is going to be the the darkest area in the light just as we approach the shadow. And it's really going to be the most important value in terms of delineating the curvature of this form. So let's go ahead with just a little bit of burnt umber and create that terminator line, or sorry, that dark light. See that? How it's starting to create the illusion of form in a very simplistic fashion. And then the next thing we can think about is the reflection. So a little bit of cadmium green. So reflected light must always be in the shadow. So what I mean is that it's usually safer to use a color change in the shadow to create the reflected light as opposed to actually trying to raise the value too much. And now the last thing we're going to think about in terms of the form of the sphere is going to be the little accent here that establishes the bottom of our lemon as it starts to kind of overlap with this lemon. And we're going to do that with the rest of the lemons. Let's move on to the slice of lemon. So with titanium white and yellow ochre, let's go ahead and put in this pretty strong light. It goes right up to here. Let's put a little more titanium white. Remember, titanium white is pretty useful for raising the value very quickly, and it also kind of is a coolant as well, which is what I wanted for that. There we go. Now let's put a little bit of cadmium yellow deep into this mixture, but it's still pretty bright for this little shape here. Gonna spin the brush a little bit. There we go. Now I'm gonna get the brush that I used for this little shape. Now that might be the wrong brush. Oh well. I'm just gonna add the same mixture, the ivory black, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal. And now we have this color back almost. I think what happened is a little bit of titanium white got into that. All right, so now we have that color back. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is just cut into here a little bit to create kind of a sharp edge. And now I'm gonna get a little bit of cadmium yellow deep with a tiny bit of cadmium red medium and a touch of flake white. We're going to get this shape here. All right, and there's even a little tiny glimpse of it up here. Very simple. Now I'm going to get a little bit of cadmium green and yellow ochre. So just cadmium green and yellow ochre in about equal parts. Now we're going to have this little lemon. Now I know there's a type of yellow, I think called cadmium yellow lemon, that I could have used for the lemons, but I don't really have that tube, and don't really have much experience with it, but there is a color out there called cadmium yellow lemon. Just a random fact there. So let's push the shape in a little bit. Let's see, this is going to come in a little bit like this. Let's use the fan brush to eliminate some glare and to kind of soften the edge there. A little bit of burnt umber. Let's just create a kind of crisp edge here. Very painterly effect. There we go. And back to the cadmium yellow deep and just that. I'm going to go ahead and put this little shape, this little turning plane. Now I'm going to get a little bit of ivory black and go back to this shape here. So ivory black and actually a little bit of burnt umber. This goes up here. Take some of the color from the ground, kind of soften this edge here. Now, there's a little bit of competition between these two values, and I don't want there to be much competition because this is in the light. So either this is going to go lighter or this is going to go darker. I think I'm going to do a kind of a mix of the two. So I'm going to use a little more of that mixture for this light. So I'm going to use a bit of yellow ochre, cadmium green, and titanium white. That was a bit too much titanium white. It's a little better. I'm going to leave some little traces here of the little detail. Now I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber and cadmium green to this brush. A little more cadmium green. Just push this value a little darker. Let's soften this little edge here while we're at it. This shape is actually coming inwards a little bit. Might not be able to see it on the photo reference. And by inward, I mean that this is starting to kind of curl in. Put a little warmth there. Let's even throw in a little bit of information for the seed, the little tiny seed that we see there. Start off with a little dark shape, just burnt umber. And let's add some titanium white. Now we have a little trace of a seed. And a little more titanium white and cadmium yellow. We're going to put some little strands here, some little details. Too much titanium white. See, I should have used flake white. Now with the flake white, let's just push these little strands down here. Very nice and simple. Doesn't take much. And with a little more cadmium yellow deep and just cadmium yellow deep, let's sharpen this edge here. Let's move on to the little platform now. So let's use a little bit of kind of the same mixture, but different color combination, or sorry, different values. So we're going to use a little bit of ultramarine blue, cobalt teal, flake white. Let's go ahead and put in this little tone here. So that's going to be our first little plane change into the platform. So let's use a little more blue. So cobalt teal, ultramarine blue. And there are some areas here that are really blue, such as this little area here. It's really, really blue. And over here as well. Very bright and blue area. And right over here, we're going to have the really light lights. So this is going to be kind of where the fabric starts to reflect a little bit of light. So just titanium white, cobalt teal. Let's just put that light shape in there. Very simple. Just kind of squiggle the brush in there to create kind of a soft edge. A little more titanium white. Kind of varying the direction of the brush marks a little bit. Not trying to copy exactly what I'm looking at. Now let's just fill in the rest of this. Let's see here. There's even a little plane of light here. So using the same brush, I'm going to start to pick up a little light there. And it goes all the way down here. All right, back to the Cobalt Teal. A little bit of Flake white. Even more blue over here. Quite a bit of blue. So Cobalt Teal, titanium white. A lot of blue over here. A little bit of ultramarine blue. Let's put in this little plane change here. And while we're at it, let's soften this edge now. I want this edge here to be really soft, almost non-existent, kind of like a camera focusing in on this little area. So let's take this color, create a little plane change here. A little more titanium white. Simple little plane change here. But while we're at it, we're going to create a very soft edge here. Very soft. Now over here, there's going to be a little more light. Tiny bit of light there. As well as over here, there's going to be a little more light on the edge of the lemon. Nice sharp edge there. Going to let this edge remain soft. Now I'm going to get the brush that I used for the background, start to put in some dark down here. Let's use some ultramarine blue. So there is a darker shape over here. We want to put that in now. And we're going to let kind of the middle tone there remain. So let's just combine these edges here, making a nice lost and found edge. Let's put a little bit of light over here. Now there's even going to be, let's vary the hue a little bit. Let's add some warmth. So we're going to use a tiny bit of Alizarin permanent into our mixture. A little bit of light right here. It's creating a nice little pattern. Kind of almost like a ripple in a wave, really. Tiny bit more ultramarine blue. Some of the dark blues over here. Cobalt teal. A little more blue there. Now we're just going to add a few little kind of specks of light all around. Now let's go ahead and work the transitions between the form within this white container. So I'm going to use a little bit of ultramarine blue, ivory black, a little tiny bit of alizarin permanent. So now we have three main values within this curve. Let's just go ahead and lose that edge there. So we have light, shadow, and a halftone. So now I'm going to handle this a little differently because there's a lot of reflection going on with this white object over top of a blue fabric. Now I usually say maintain your shapes of light and shadow, and I'm going to do that with this framework, but this value here, this reflected light, is going to get really close in value to the light. So I'm going to use a little bit of hue variation for that. So cobalt teal, titanium white. I should have used flake white. So cobalt teal, flake white. So let's see. I'm going to keep this area warmer, this area cooler. Now that's way too bright, so I accidentally used titanium in an area that I should have used flake. All right, so let's go ahead and put this color change. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and go all the way to the outside edge now. Just kind of lose that edge. Now with a little bit of alizarin permanent into the ultramarine blue mixture that we had, we're going to try to add some variation to this color. Let's use a little more of the alizarin permanent. Establish our little edge there. Let's bring this edge back. And even more cobalt teal and flake white. This reflection is pretty strong. Can't ignore it. I'm going to use my fan brush here to help soften the edges. Now it's a little tiny bit of cadmium red medium. I'm going to soften this transition here between the light and shadow. And I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine blue, kind of make this edge a little sharper. Let's use a little more ivory black. Just trying to make that transition a little more solid now. Now with a different brush and a little more ivory black, I'm going to go back at this shape again. Try to get this accent and try to minimize the glare with the fan brush. Now with a little bit of ivory black and ultramarine blue, let's just go ahead and put a little halftone here. Getting a lot of glare now. A little more cobalt teal. Let's just soften this edge now. Now I'm going to use a little tiny bit of cobalt teal and thin the paint out with a little bit of mineral spirits. So Cobalt Teal, Ivory Black, Flake White. We're going to have just a little spark of light here. Single brush stroke time, hopefully. It's almost never the case, really. So with a different brush, tiny little brush, I'm going to mix the Cobalt Teal and Flake White again. Try to get this light. It's a nice little shimmer. So now we're going to put in a few tiny little details for the strainer. So the little holes here, so I'm going to just use Ivory Black and burnt umber. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's let 5 hide somewhere back there. Add a little more paint. And the paint does have a tiny bit of odorless mineral spirits just to kind of thin it out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's put just let's let just 3 of them show here. 1, 2, 3. Now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of titanium white and yellow ochre. So we're going to illustrate some of the light hitting the bottom of these little openings. 1 there, 1 there. Let's choose 1 over here, 1 over there, and let's say 1 right about here. And I don't want that to stick out too much, so what I'm going to do is soften with the fan brush. See how I'm kind of just blending it into the paint. This is one other advantage of working wet on wet. Can have a lot of control over the edge quality. Alright, just about the last thing I'll do is just with a little Ivory Black and Ultramarine Blue, I'm just going to soften this edge here by darkening this value. Just want to soften it a little bit. Felt like it was kind of sticking out. Now with the fan brush, I'm going to eliminate a little bit of glare. Let's just soften this edge a little bit more. It's always down to the edges, really, at the end. And with that, we have the conclusion of this quick and simple little still life painting demonstration. I hope that these videos are helping you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one.